We knew it was bad as we watched in real time the hordes descending on the Capitol Wednesday, scaling walls, smashing through barricades, breaking windows. But with every new detail we learn, the more chilling it all becomes, with videos of police officers getting crushed by rioters, getting dragged down the Capitol stairs and beaten with a flag, images of people who clearly came prepared for battle, with weapons and zip-tie handcuffs, and the sounds of chants telling us exactly who they were looking for and why. Federal agents are now in the process of trying to figure out just how much advanced planning went into the siege and whether members of the mob had intended to hold members of Congress hostage. And officials say many more arrests may still be to come. For the record, and despite right-wing media assertions, the FBI has said there is no evidence that Antifa activists were involved in Wednesday's attack. But the big question that remains is, what happens next to the man who sparked this all? The Washington, D.C. Attorney General has said he's looking at charging the president with inciting violence after he leaves office. And if Democrats have their way, that time will be up sooner rather than later. House leaders formally introduced a single article of impeachment today, charging Trump with incitement of insurrection, and say they'll take up that measure Wednesday if Vice President Mike Pence doesn't invoke the 25th Amendment first. Pelosi is giving Pence 24 hours from the time the House passes a resolution on the issue. That vote is expected tomorrow after House Republicans blocked an effort to get it through today by unanimous consent. I'm joined now by Jeannie Gersen. She's a professor at Harvard Law School and a contributing writer at the New Yorker magazine. Ben Clements is a former federal prosecutor, former chief legal counsel to Governor Deval Patrick, and now chair of the group Free Speech for People. He also co-authored an op-ed in the Boston Globe just before Wednesday's attack, calling on Congress to impeach Trump again, bar him from future office, and, quote, this time, get it right. He's also co-author of the book, The Constitution Demands It, The Case for the Impeachment of Donald Trump. Jeannie and Ben, thank you so much for being here.
Good to see you, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
Jeannie, pleasure. Can I start with you? In your New Yorker piece this weekend, you say there'll be time to assess whether there's criminal liability. You say the urgent issue is Donald Trump remaining president until January 20th. How will impeachment, with 9 days left, address that more urgent issue?
Well, for one thing, when I wrote the piece, it was possible, it is still possible for Congress to actually shorten its procedures. We saw an impeachment process take several weeks, months even, but that need not be the case. It is in fact possible for Congress to change its procedures in order to make it move much more quickly. Now, it looks very, very likely, as indicated by Mitch McConnell, that that's not going to happen, that he's going to stick to the schedule where impeachment's not actually going to be through with trial and conviction until Inauguration Day or after. So right now, it's not looking like impeachment removal is really going to happen.
Ben, even if there was adequate time, it seems to me that you wouldn't be satisfied, because it seems to me from reading your piece, your ultimate goal is not just impeachment, but a permanent bar from running for office again. And you can't get to that majority vote until you get through the two-thirds conviction vote. Am I correct about that?
Yes, that's correct.
You are, Jim, but you can't get to any of that without starting impeachment in the House, as the House has done. And certainly, I mean, my view is they should have done that right after they voted to certify the Electoral College vote, and they've waited too long already. But that doesn't mean they should wait more. They should move as expeditiously as possible and make the Senate do their job.
And Ben, your view, obviously they can vote to do this, convict and bar post inauguration of a new president. Jeannie, one of the arguments, primary argument I've heard made by everybody from Nancy Pelosi on down amongst the Democrats is this is all about accountability. Regardless of speed issues, regardless of potential greater political divide, it's about accountability. Is that the core argument for impeaching this president with such little time to go?
I do think that it is very important. An impeachment, even if ultimately there would be no conviction, if that were to happen, it would still be an impeachment. And he would be the first president to have been impeached twice. And that would be a statement that would live on in our history. And that is actually important to this country. I do think, though, that we shouldn't brush under the rug the actual danger that still remains of having this man in the role of the president for the next 10 days. Accountability is one thing, but emergency is another.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. But even you said a minute ago, in the best case scenario, in an unlikely scenario, but the best case scenario, we might see a conviction and a removal. And there are a lot of caveats there by maybe the 19th. The reality is we're going to have it in the best case, maybe at least a week more, 8 days more, and likely 9 days more this president, no matter how urgent you and millions of others consider it to be. Correct?
Well,
Jeannie?
It is correct if impeachment is the only avenue that we are working right now, but it is still the case that Pelosi has made clear that what she wants is for Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. And that, if that were to happen and the majority of the cabinet were to join him in doing so, the removal of the president from the presidential duties would be immediate.
But Jeannie, it seems to me your final, if I may for a second, Jeannie, in the final paragraph of your piece in the New Yorker this weekend, you seem to be making the case, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding you, that a resignation for pardon would be an acceptable outcome. The good news, from what I understand Supreme Court law to be, Supreme Court determined, didn't they, about a century ago, that accepting a pardon is also acknowledging guilt. That's, I guess, the good news. But why would Donald Trump, Jeannie, ever accept this in light of the fact he's likely to be prosecuted in New York State and New York City, even if he were to get a pardon from an acting President Mike Pence?
I think that he has to understand that even a prosecution in New York, these state prosecutions, which may well occur, they're still remote and they may not work out. If he gets a pardon, a real one from acting President Pence, then he could say that he got a good deal, that he got a pardon and he agreed to resign and that was his choice. And maybe, just like with everything, he could spin it to mean I didn't accept guilt, but I got a pardon out of it. And so I wouldn't completely give up on that line of attack. I don't think it's likely, but it is something to think about.
Ben, I interrupted you a minute ago. What did you want to say?
Well, I was just going to say, in terms of your point, Jim, that there's not much time left and how can he possibly be convicted and removed by the Senate. You know, that op-ed that you mentioned that I wrote, there were 14 days left in Donald Trump's term when I wrote it, and a lot of people had that same reaction. And the very next day, Donald Trump encouraged, condoned, and essentially incited a seditious riot on the Capitol. So Mitch McConnell's position today might not be his position tomorrow. There is an endless number of horrible, dangerous, national security threatening things Donald Trump could do between now and the end of his presidential term. So the idea that we should hold back and think that we can just ride this out is a big mistake.
You know, Ben, I want to stay with you for a second and talk about another move that at least some in Congress are talking about, expelling some of their fellow members, particularly people like Josh Hawley from Missouri and Ted Cruz, who they consider to be part of the inciting of this behavior, too, by their decision to lead the charge against the certification of the electors. Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, I did not have it memorized, but here it is. Each House may determine the rules of its proceeding and punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of two-thirds expel a member. The way I read this, Ben, starting with you, is this is sort of like Gerald Ford, I hope I get this right, when he was a member of the House said, I think he was trying to impeach Justice Douglas at the time, or Jeannie, you're nodding, so I guess I got it right. He said something like, high crimes and misdemeanors mean whatever we say they mean at the moment. It seems to me that this language provides great latitude to members of Congress. If they think by a two-thirds majority members should be expelled, they can be expelled. There's no constitutional standard for expulsion, is there?
No, there is not. You're absolutely right. There's no requirement of a high crime or misdemeanor. There's no requirement that the senators you referred to and the others who have engaged in this rebellion against the country and our democracy be proven to have done those things. The Senate and the House decide for themselves if a member has engaged in conduct unbefitting of a member, and for that reason vote by two-thirds. In fact, Jim, there's a separate provision of the Constitution in the constitutional amendment, or 14th Amendment, Section 3, that actually disqualifies members, any federal officer who has engaged in rebellion against the country following taking the oath of office from holding office. So arguably, Cruz, Hawley, and others are subject to removal without the 2/3 vote. And certainly there's precedent going back to the Civil War for a United States attorney to bring quo warranto proceedings to remove such an official from office.
Jeannie, do you think that expelling any members of Congress by their fellow members would advance any cause that you're concerned about?
I think that's something we need to take time and think about. And there are going to be a lot of different questions about the role, the specific role that these members played in the violent insurrection. And that, I mean, I think that will be debatable. And really, we just heard about the 14th Amendment and Section 3. I think that is the kind of situation where if Hawley and Cruz wanted to run again, if Hawley and Cruz wanted to run again, then they would face discussions about that. I think right now, at this very moment, the idea of using the 14th Amendment, Section 3 is more of a remote one, and one that's intriguing and yet not very plausible.
Can we spend the last couple of minutes on something that at least I think is less a legal issue? At least I believe it is. Every day before I go on the radio, literally last thing I do, I'm embarrassed to admit, is I go to Real Donald Trump on Twitter to see what he had to say at about 2:11. And today when I went, I forgot that his account had been suspended, which also reminded me that Parler also is been deplatformed. And Parler, for those who don't know, is sort of the darker, more right-wing version of Twitter. It's been deplatformed by places like Google and Apple. People like Angela Merkel, Alexei Navalny, obviously the Russian dissident, have voiced great concerns, starting with you, Jeannie. Again, not a legal issue. It's not a First Amendment issue. At least I don't believe it is. They're private corporations. About shutting down the speech of even people like Donald Trump and others. Do you have concerns about that, or do you think they did the right thing?
I do think they did the right thing purely because of this emergency. The fact that there was a national crisis, an emergency, a reasonable fear and danger that further violence could be incited by this man. However, I do think that all things that you do in times of emergency and crisis will have consequences and implications for both the general public and for Donald Trump. And I think that those are things that need to be discussed, because do we want Twitter to have the power to deplatform anyone they want? Right now, it's a very targeted situation having to do with a violent insurrection that already occurred and may continue still. So I have no problem with the deplatforming of Donald Trump in this situation. Whether it extends to other people with viewpoints that are maybe more in the gray area, that's a real issue. And on that, I would possibly agree that we need to think more carefully about it.
How about you, Ben? You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I agree. They absolutely did the right thing. I think they did it too late. I think the danger that was being imposed by Trump's lies and incitements of violence has been going on for many, many months, and they waited too long. And I think the question about whether we want them to have all this power, it's not the question, do we want Twitter to have the power to deplatform the president of the United States? It's, do we want Twitter and Facebook and these other giant social media companies to have the power to amplify fascist, anti-democratic, racist incitements to violence that have destroyed democracies around the world, that have led to genocide in one country around the world? There is a desperate need for federal regulation of these social media companies.
Ben Clements, Jeannie Sue Gersen, thank you both for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.